only in California do you have this kind of stuff that we're going to be talking about going on.
Yeah, I would not have believed it until the bill was actually drafted and gone through the committee. I wouldn't believe that people would actually try to take guns from law enforcement.
No, and that's what we're talking about. There's a bill coming up that would require law enforcement officers to surrender privately owned firearms when they leave the agency. And we're specifically talking about assault weapons they bought with letterhead from their sheriff's or police department.
Yes, and that's the bizarre thing is that in California we have a permit system so you can go out and buy a so-called assault weapon. They decided to use this letterhead system to allow officers to spend their own money to go out and buy so-called assault weapons for quote-unquote duty use during this time frame.
Mm-hmm.
And now after a Department of Justice opinion has come out, they are now being told that if they leave the agency, they have to surrender all of the guns that they personally purchased and may be only allowed to keep one if they get another letter from the police chief or sheriff.
And they have to surrender them, and they don't get any money for them, even though they paid for them.
Exactly, and that's the weird part is, they're talking about how different ways you can try to dispose of them, but the final point is that the instant you leave the agency for whatever reason, you're retired, medically discharged because of some problem you have or something else, you would have to surrender those guns to the law enforcement agency, and then you have to figure out how you can dispose of them. But the bottom line is that there's bulletins going out from different agencies telling officers, the men and women that we trust, that they are going to have to surrender their guns they purchased and then figure out which one they get to keep. Maybe they get to keep.
And you hit the word right there, trust. I mean, here you have people, officers, that you've trusted with these firearms when they were in the department. So what changes when they leave?
Well, that's the amazing part about the bill is, and that's what I stressed at the Capitol. I said, when I was testifying against the bill, I said, we're here today to figure out how many firearms you're going to let officers keep. And the weird thing is that they've already been vetted. I mean, they're police officers, so then they have to go to the police chief or sheriff and get another letter certifying that they're okay for them, that they're trusted by their police chief or sheriff to buy the so-called assault weapon. Mm-hmm. So it's not like they're just willy-nilly buying stuff. And so they're law enforcement already. They've been given a specific letter to buy the firearm by the police chief or sheriff, and now they're being told, well, we don't even trust you even after we've vetted you 2 or 3 different times, and it's a blanket decision. Everybody who is in law enforcement who's bought these, and there's tens of thousands of them that we have found who have these, will be told they have to surrender all the guns and then maybe have a possibility of retaining one of them, maybe, if they get another letter.
I was trying to read all that this is about and trying to make sense of it, and I wonder if the people that are pushing this legislation even understand what it's about.
Well, unfortunately, I do think they understand what it's about. The bottom line is that there are legislators in California who do not even trust law enforcement officers to own guns. That's the bottom line. Because when the so-called assault weapons law was passed some years ago, anybody who had one in their lawful possession was allowed to register them and keep them. They're not banned for that reason per se. And what I've been talking about the Capitol is we trust men and women in law enforcement. Mm-hmm. If this is a problem or a perceived problem, it's very simple. You just grandfather them in, and you say, okay, if you had one and your police chief allowed you to buy one, and you leave the agency, you get to keep it. But they don't even trust them to keep them. Mm-hmm. One of the authors of the bill said, well, we know that, some people are going to like the fact they have to turn all their guns, but we think it's fair that we at least let them keep one of them. And I know personally a training officer who has 8 different rifles he's bought on his own money to help train law enforcement because his department could not afford to buy the firearms. So he went out and bought them themselves. And he will have to surrender all 8 of those and maybe get to keep one of them.
Unbelievable. It really is. I mean, as you point out, the solution to the problem is reforming the current law permitting it.
Well, exactly right, and that's the way it has to be. That's what needs to be done, because if the current law is not reformed, what they've done in essence is they have now taken away even the ability for law enforcement to buy these so-called assault weapons, which means that the legislators are making a political decision that they do not even trust law enforcement officers to own a simple thing like an AR-15.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're not talking about machine guns. We're talking about rifles that everywhere else in the United States are lawful to purchase, and all they are AR-15s and different variations on the theme. So who would ever have thought that we would get to a position in California where even police officers are being told that they're not trusted to own a simple AR-15 type rifle?
Absolutely, but again, I said only in California.
Well, that's the sad thing about it.
Yeah.
And
the other sad thing is, like Chuck Michelle always says, if it's going on in California, it's coming soon to a neighborhood near you.
Well, that's the whole thing is that I have talked to legislators at the Capitol who don't want law enforcement officers to have any guns. They go, well, they shouldn't be allowed to have any guns. A lot of them, of course, are from the Bay Area. And, there's even discussions out here in California that officers should not be even allowed to have tasers. So they can't be trusted to have tasers on duty.
Oh, but they're going to trust the government to protect them? You got to be kidding me.
Well, see, that's the ironic part of all this, is that when this is all going on, is the ironic part is that there are going to be citizens in California who had AR-15s when the law took effect some years ago. They registered them, and they were grandfathered in. They can keep them for the rest of their lives, no matter how many they had. If you had 100 AR-15s, if you registered all 100 of them, you get to keep them. How ironic it is now that when they've changed the interpretation of the law, that citizens were allowed to keep all the rifles that they purchased as long as they registered them, re-registered them, but law enforcement officers have to have all of them confiscated except for one.
What's the status on this bill?
Yeah, the bill is Assembly Bill 2549 by Assemblyman Isidore Hall. The bill is now on the Assembly floor and could come up for a vote anytime. It could come up Thursday, and more than likely it could be next week. People need to call their assembly members and say very simply, we trust law enforcement officers to have their guns. And, some of the legislators are going, well, why is the NRA, so bothered by this? I said, well, because we're the largest law enforcement organization in the United States. I said, I have a lot of NRA members who are law enforcement officers, a lot. So we're protecting our members, but also we're protecting the rights of everybody to keep their firearms, not just, Group A or Group B. So 2549 is the bill number. It's Assembly Bill 2549. It's up on the Assembly floor. So we need to have everybody call their assembly members and tell them not to pass this bill, tell them to reform the current permit system in California, and allow officers and everybody to buy the firearms that they should be legally able to own.